Hello everybody and welcome back to our channel. We are Brigade of Beans, a diagnosed dissociative identity disorder system. My name's Gale and today, as you can probably tell, doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be tier listing different experiences that we had growing up on a boat. I don't think we've spoken much about our childhood on here, but for some context, when we were a kid, our parents started building a boat. Our dad is a qualified boat builder, and when we were about 7 or 8 years old, we moved onto the boat, and then between the years of 2010 to 2015, we travelled on that boat between New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and then eventually up the coast of Australia. And there was a lot of different events that happened when we were living on a boat. We have come up with 20 common occurrences and some once-off events that were kind of stand out to me in particular. And I'm going to go through and discuss them and rank them in a tier list because I have a lot to say about it. And I thought that this would be an interesting way to discuss a kind of unique childhood experience that we had. Okay, so the first thing that we have is bathing in the ocean. And I'm going to put this on, it sucked. In the boat that we had, it was relatively small, and whilst we had a bathroom, we didn't have a designated shower. There was a shower head that came out of the sink, and you had to put plastic around the entire bathroom to be able to use it. So when we were traveling and away in the islands, I didn't have access to marina facilities. Most of the time that we bathed, we would wash ourselves in the salt water and then rinse off with fresh water out of jerry cans that had been put on the roof in the sun to heat up. And this meant that it just kind of sucked. Like, we did not develop a regular bathing routine. Even though we rinsed off with salt water, like, we were still washing in salt water. And it meant that for like large chunks of our times, we wouldn't shower properly, like have a proper heated shower for weeks or months. Attached to that, even when we were in marina facilities, you had to pay for these showers. So we had to pay, I think it was like $2 for 3 minutes to have a shower, which meant that most of the time, because our family didn't have a lot of money, we were showering with all of our family members in a 6-minute time frame, with all 5 of us crammed into the same. It was like a family-sized cubicle, but it was still a cubicle with all 5 of us. And that also sucked, having to jump in and out of the water, to rinse off, to rush, to just be cold and shivering while someone else is in the water. Yeah, no, that actually genuinely sucked. On a very similar vein, having to walk to the bathroom. So, boats are equipped with what is known as a black tank, which is where all of the human waste goes. However, when you're in a marina for a long period of time, it is more effective to use the bathroom facilities that they provide. Except, that means leaving the boat, getting off the boat, walking up the dock, and going into the bathrooms. The only good thing about using marina bathrooms is that they'd have fun little things on the back of their door. And we would spend way longer in the bathroom than we had to just reading those things, whether it be jokes, learning how to tie a knot, and we just spent a lot of time reading in the bathroom. But having to walk 5 minutes to the bathroom, especially when you're a kid, like, really sucks. Like, you can put some of the waste into the black tank, but if we're in the marina for a long time, we can't really empty it. You have to, like, leave the marina and go out into the ocean to empty it. And yes, boats are emptying their human waste into the ocean all the time. If you didn't know that, there's a fun fact for you. So that also sucked. Something more fun was getting to create our own curriculum. We were homeschooled from essentially our 3rd year of primary school for several years. Then we did the last year of primary school, and then we were homeschooled for another year. And when you're in New Zealand, because we were New Zealand citizens, you get to choose whether you do correspondence, where the government will send you out the schooling that everyone else is doing in their normal classrooms, or if you create your own curriculum. And our parents opted to create their own curriculum. They still had to send back evidence that we were still learning, but we could essentially do whatever we wanted. I could see this going really, really poorly in some situations, but it worked out okay. I think it was helped by the fact that I really enjoy learning, I enjoy studying, I enjoy doing schoolwork. Like, I just, that's something that I really, really enjoy. So it wasn't hard for me to want to learn. We would buy those like books that you can get that are like, year 3 and 4 maths, year 5 and 6 grammar, and just fill those out. And then once you finish that year's workbook, you just move on to the next one, which meant I would sometimes be working a couple of years ahead of what the actual books said. It also meant that our parents had to teach us everything, and they obviously don't know everything. They're not qualified teachers, and whilst they're both like adults, there was still a bunch of information that they probably didn't know. But it did also mean that we got to do some quite cool things. Like, we got to go to museums. Sometimes when we were snorkeling, we'd then recreate, like, my brothers used to recreate like the the fish that we'd seen and made like little diagrams of them. I used to write a lot of stories. Like I'd have books of pages and pages of pages of just the same story. There would also be times where after we got our tablets, so I think it was 2012, my brothers and I all got tablets that were mostly for school. We were allowed to play games with them for half an hour a day, but otherwise they were for schoolwork. But we convinced our parents a few years later, I think it would have been 2015 because we were traveling up the Australian coast, we convinced our parents to let us play Minecraft for school because we were building in creative mode historical buildings. I cannot remember what we were building, but I know that one of my brothers built the Globe, so where Shakespeare performed his plays, and my other brother was building an Aztec village. And that was really quite cool. It was quite fun to be able to create our own curriculum and to be able to do our own things, and learn where we wanted to learn and learn how we wanted to learn. It did mean that we didn't go to school, which meant that we didn't see the same regular kids. We didn't develop that routine. I didn't know how to write assignments when I entered school because I'd never had to do it. Like I didn't learn how to write assignments in primary school and like the first year of high school because I never had to write an assignment. I didn't have that time constraint or that time pressure. And that combined with having ADHD and autism means that I just can't do assignments now. Like my brain has never learned how to do them. And that does kind of suck, and it does like bump it down. Like there were things that I missed out on. Part of it was having school friends and a regular routine and learning how to do specific things. But it was also really, really cool and really, really fun to build our own curriculum. The next one, dragging anchor. Luckily for us, we did not drag anchor too many times. And when we did, it didn't end up with the boat taking damage, which is why it's only going in, it sucked. But there were a handful of times where our anchor just didn't work and the boat moved. Sometimes we caught it really early, and it meant that one time we woke up on the beach. Our boat had dragged anchor onto a beach and there were rocks really close by, and luckily we went onto the beach. It's the same beach where they film Home and Away in Australia, and the police came down to ask if we were okay. They were like on a regular thing, they weren't cool on us, and we were fine. We just had to wait till the high tide came back in and we were able to move our boat because we lived on a catamaran, which also, for those of you who don't know boats very well, we were on a catamaran, which meant that it had two hulls. That also meant that we had a very shallow draft because a monohull who only has one hull has to have quite a long, I can't remember what it's called, but quite a long bit in the water to anchor it so it doesn't just flip over. Whereas a catamaran, because it has two hulls, can have a shallow draft. We also had a shallower draft because we had boards that we could raise up and down so that we could make them come higher, so we could go into shallower water and then make them go down when we needed to be more balanced in the water. And I am forgetting what those terms are because it's been a long time. But anyway, this meant that when we were on the beach, it was very easy for us to get off the beach ourselves, whereas other boats might have been in a little bit more trouble. And also because we had two hulls, we were only like this on the beach rather than being fully on our side. There was another time that we dragged anchor. This was when we were living in Victoria, and our boat was anchored off of just basically a beach, and we'd moved it because we knew that there were storms coming and this was meant to be a more sheltered and secluded area. And we had gone to school and then we came back and the boat wasn't where it was meant to be. It was still luckily within reach with the dinghy. We got back to it, but it wasn't where it was meant to be. And it was raining and windy and we had to travel in the dinghy and everything was getting wet, and it was, our school books were getting wet. It was miserable. I didn't put traveling in a dinghy on here, but traveling on a dinghy would go in, it sucked. It could be fun going up on the plane, going fast, seeing things were really fun. When it's wet, when it's windy, when it's raining and you're being splashed and everything's getting wet and you're having to jump into the ocean to drag it onto the beach and your legs are getting wet, it sucked. But moving on, losing items to the ocean. This is going in, it is what it is, because we didn't lose too many important things. But when we used to hang out our clothing on the boat, after hand washing it when we were traveling and didn't have access to marina facilities, we would hang it up on the railings that go along the side of the boat. And so this meant that if sudden winds happened or if the pegs weren't on right, sometimes those clothing fell into the ocean. If it was shallow enough, we'd be able to dive down and pick it up, but sometimes it was too deep for us to be able to get. There were also times when we would be like washing really dirty bowls off the back of the boat to like get the worst of it out before we cleaned it with fresh water, and sometimes you drop them. And one time we dropped them and we were going to go and get it when the tide went down so it was shallower, and then someone told us that there were sharks in the area. And so we decided that we were just going to sacrifice that bowl. We had friends on other boats who had like toddlers who were throwing things, and so they lost toys and stuff over the sides of their boat because the kid was throwing things. Luckily, that didn't really happen with us, but there was definitely instances where we lost things. We lost snorkels and masks, clothes, bowls, all sorts of things, but luckily nothing too major. Social isolation. Negative 10 out of 10. What the fuck? So we traveled a lot, but that also meant there were periods of time when we were traveling where the only people we interacted with were our family members, and we didn't see anyone else. Or we might see other people in villages or at markets, but you weren't building these relationships. You were constantly traveling, and it just really sucked. We read a lot of books. We used a lot of escapism, and we escaped into media quite a bit. And it just really sucked. We felt really alone. We felt really isolated. We felt really disconnected with people. We were depressed. We didn't know what depression was, but we remember being in Tonga the first time and like having this deep sense of something being missing. And our child brain trying to work out what it was like, I haven't had apples in ages. Maybe I miss apples. And then we got back to New Zealand and we had apples again. We're like, no, I still feel this deep emptiness inside of me. It was depression. It really, really sucked. It really, really took a toll on us, and it still affects us. We still have this deep sense of loneliness within us, even though we have really good friendships now, even though we have really strong connections now, even though we've been friends with some of our friends for nearly 10 years now, we still carry that lonely little child inside of us. Quite literally, actually, because there are altars who are time up to that period, but also metaphorically. Something else that was enjoyable, brewing beer. So we were, again, a minor, but our dad decided to brew his own beer, and we would help out with that. It was kind of like chemistry for our schooling. And we would help like put the sugar in and like put it in the big barrel that it had to sit in while it brewed. And like there was some times we tried to brew it in New Zealand where it got too cold, so like the whole barrel was wrapped up in jumpers because we didn't have heating on the boat, which meant that's another thing that I didn't put on here, but we didn't have heating on the boat. So if it was too hot, it was too hot. If it was too cold, it was too cold. You did what you could. But brewing beer was quite fun. I remember there being one instance where we brewed some beer and it did not go well, and we all tried it and it tasted horrible. Like, I wasn't drinking a lot of this beer, let me be clear, but I was trying some of it, and I was having it heavily diluted with lemonade when I was playing card games with my parents. Mind you, I would have been like 11 or 12 at the time. But it was still fun, it was still enjoyable, and I think that was a fun thing to have done. Leaving people. Another 10 out of 10, what the fuck? This is closely related to social isolation, but more specifically, leaving people. When you're traveling, that entitles leaving, and that also means leaving people behind. So it meant leaving behind our extended family when we went away, and we would sometimes have contact with them with calls and stuff, but not very frequently. It also meant leaving our friends and not knowing if or when we would see them again. I know that there was a couple of instances where we thought we would see someone the next day, but then because of weather, either they or us decided to move on, and we didn't actually get to say goodbye properly. We said, I'll see you tomorrow, and that was the last time we saw them, and now it's been well over a decade. There were times when you said goodbye to people expecting never to see them again, and then randomly running into them in a different country. And it was nice to see them again, and it was cool to see them again, but it also was just sad when you had to leave them again. And this also really warped our perception of what made friends, because we were so used to seeing and leaving people in such a quick succession of time that if we thought that if we had a conversation with someone, that meant we were friends. Also, the autism doesn't help with this. Like, we really struggled to define different types of relationships anyway, but it was really fed into and exacerbated by this experience. And it still has left us with this fear that we are going to leave people. We're not so scared of people leaving us, but we're scared that we're going to leave people, even though we now have control over where we live. We now have influence over what we do with our life, but we are still scared we're going to leave people. And there is so much grief around all the friends that we had and we left, because it's not just like, it's because we were kids. We couldn't keep in contact. We didn't have social media. We weren't texting each other. Like, we weren't keeping in touch. They were gone. And I don't know if or when I will ever see them again. And also, we've all grown up so much since then, it won't be the same. But I also just love people. I love being around people. I need people. I need a social life to feel complete. And I just didn't really get that in a way that was meaningful, because I always knew that these people that I got along with would be gone one day, possibly even the next day. Seasickness. This is only going in, it is what it is, because we don't have terrible seasickness. when we used to travel, we wouldn't get super, super seasick in the big waves. We would feel the most nauseous in the small waves. When everyone else was feeling fine, that's when we'd get nauseous. But when it would get really bad, we wouldn't feel as seasick. So I'm putting it in as what it is because it wasn't enjoyable, but it also wasn't that bad. And a very similar thing, passage. Passage is when a boat leaves a place and then gets to another place. So this is traveling from New Zealand to Tonga, Tonga to Fiji, Fiji to Australia. That length of time between one place to another is called passage, and it means not seeing land. You're just on the boat and there's nothing else going on. And passage sucked. It wasn't like horribly traumatic, but it wasn't fun. The first 3 days, pretty much everyone would be terribly seasick. As I mentioned, we wouldn't be super sick, but everyone else would be throwing up or just queasy, laying down, low energy. And so like most of the meals that we had was like cold baked beans, cold spaghetti, just like muesli bars. Like there wasn't any actual food being cooked because no one felt well enough to make it or eat it. For us, passage could last anywhere for the travel that we did, 3 to 10 days. I think the longest passage we had was 15 days, but that was because we stopped over at Minerva Reef. So Minerva Reef isn't actually land. There's no like government that you have to like sign in and do visas for. But in the middle of the ocean, there's this reef that has a big circle around it, and you can bring your boat in and it's sheltered and you can anchor there. And that was a really cool experience, and it did extend our passage time. It was kind of like a pause in the passage, but there was still no actual land. But there were other boats there, so we did get to talk to people on the VHF, sorry. But yeah, passage kind of sucked. There was also having to do shifts to make sure that we were sailing in the first place. For the first few years that we traveled, we didn't have an autopilot. So that meant that somebody had to be on the wheel 24/7, watching the coordinates, making sure that we were heading in the right compass direction, watching the sails, making sure that if the wind got too high, we put a reef in. If the wind got too low, we took a reef out. Like having to tack and jibe with the weather, and also having to get other people to help with that. It's like through the day, my brothers and I would sometimes take like shorter shifts for that first time because we were quite younger. But then for the last stint that we did of travel in to the islands in 2013, we had an autopilot. So this was the first passage that we did where we didn't take crew. Normally when we did a passage, we would take crew with us, and these would just be random people. We didn't pay them, they didn't pay us, they just came on our boat and helped us sail and got to go to a different country. That's just how it works. And so that helped us. But this last passage that we did, or the last one that we did to the islands, we had an autopilot. So there was no crew, which meant that my brothers and I was 11, they would have been 10, took the day shift. So we'd have like 2-hour shifts, I think it was, where we would have to check every like 15 minutes to make sure we were still on the right course, to check the wind and stuff. And like our parents would sometimes, like there'd probably be at least one adult awake so that we could communicate with them, but it was our responsibility. And then during the night, our parents would take shifts on and off to monitor it and wake themselves up and go and check it. But that's also kind of a weird amount of responsibility, but it was also fun. It was cool. We did mostly enjoy it, but it also did suck because everyone felt miserable. No one felt happy. Most people were throwing up and vomiting for at least the first 3 days. It sucked, but at least it wasn't like horrifically traumatic. Not having a house. I'm going to put this in, it is what it is, but it is a point that I wanted to talk about because it's not like we were actually homeless because we had a boat, we had our things, we had a place that we lived, we had a place that we could return to that was consistent. But that place also moved around. Like we would move from one location to another, and whilst there would be like 6 months when we were in a marina that was steady, when we were in the islands, we might only be in a place for a day or two or a couple of weeks, and there was this constant chopping and changing of where you lived and where you belonged and where you were, and that's quite destabilizing and can be quite distressing when you don't actually know, because we were a very, very heavy sleeper as a kid. That meant that if our parents chose to raise the anchor in the early morning and travel somewhere else, we'd sleep through it. And we'd wake up somewhere different that we didn't necessarily know we would be going to. It also meant that we didn't have a postal address, so like we had a PO box or stuff would be sent to the marina. But yeah, we didn't have a house. We didn't have a stable point that was always there that we could always return to. So like when we were in the islands in 2013 and we were deciding what to do next, instead of going back to New Zealand, which was familiar and comfortable, we decided to come to Australia. My mum would get better pay here as a nurse, and there was a job opportunity here for my dad. So we came to Australia. And that's the thing, there was no consistency. And I get people move houses, people change where they live. That's a normal thing. But the consistency and the frequency in which it happened when you're living on a boat is quite a bit more substantial. And As I said, it wasn't like we were actually homeless. I'm not trying to say that. So, like, it's not terribly bad, but it also wasn't great and it wasn't fun. And I don't think I would ever live on a boat or in a van and travel extensively again for the rest of my life. Storms and extreme weather, negative 10 out of 10. What the fuck? I'm going to briefly mention death here. So, if you want to skip this section, there's a timestamp on the screen. We were very lucky that we didn't experience a lot of extreme weather and storms firsthand, but there were some times that it was very close on hand. Luckily, no one in our own family was injured and our boat wasn't significantly damaged most of the time. I will get to that. But there was one time in Tonga where we were in the middle of a lightning storm and you could literally see the lightning bolts hitting the water around us, and we didn't know if it was going to hit our mast because that's a tall, pointy thing in the middle of nowhere. And that was terrifying. Heavy rain was terrifying. Strong winds were terrifying, especially if we were sailing and then there was suddenly strong winds. You have to put in reefs really quickly. You have to like do a lot so that the boat doesn't get damaged really, really quickly. And it's really quite scary. And there were instances where extreme weather harmed the people that we knew. There was a family that we knew in New Zealand that left when we were going to leave to travel to the islands. We ended up not leaving because our generator broke and we had to fix it. It's the only reason we didn't leave. And there was a very strong and unexpected storm and their boat was never heard from again. They just disappeared. Their boat went missing and it was never found. And so the 4 people who were on that boat, 3 or 4, I can't remember if they had someone with them, but at least 3, maybe 4 people most likely died, presumed dead. They never reappeared. And that wasn't someone that I was particularly close to, but the kid on that boat, I think he was a few years older than us. My brothers were friends with him. And, like, they're just gone. And that's horrifying because you also realize, especially in that situation where we were going to leave at the same time, that could have been us. Like, that really genuinely could have been us. Another time, some of our other friends decided to leave Tonga and go to Fiji. We were sailing from one island group to the next, and we left at the same time, but we went in different directions. And again, there was a very, very sudden onset of very, very strong winds. Luckily, we got to the island group we were traveling to, and we were in the protection of cliffs, so it didn't hit us very strongly. But their boat capsized. They were a catamaran. Catamarans are relatively hard to capsize because, as I said, they have 2 hulls, and their boat just capsized. And luckily, both of them were okay. Both of them survived, but that whole boat was ruined. All of their belongings were ruined. They had a lot of really, really cool, like very expensive books on that boat that my brothers and I were admiring a couple of days before, and then they were just damaged and gone and lost because their boat capsized. And then the extreme weather that did damage our boat was really, really unexpected high winds off the east coast of Australia. And these high winds, because they're funneled down off the cliffs, can hit really, really strongly, really, really suddenly. And we were sailing up the east coast. We didn't know about these winds. We didn't know about how the cliffs funneled the wind. And there was, unbeknownst to us, a small crack in one of the connection points on part of the structural integrity of our mast. I can't remember the technical terms, but there was a crack in it. None of us knew. And very, very suddenly, very, very strong winds hit our sail that was almost at full mast because it hadn't been strong before then. It went from like 15 knots to I think it was above 60. And the mast broke. The mast collapsed in on itself and fell down. And I watched it fall down past this window. And luckily, it did not do extensive damage to the boat itself. There was one small hole well above waterline. That could have been really bad if it was below waterline, but luckily it wasn't. And luckily it was only our mast because there was the option again there where our boat capsized. Luckily it didn't. We were all okay. There was only scrapes and bruises, and there was a rescue helicopter who was doing a practice flight around there who came and helped us. There were people who'd been watching us sail up the side of the coast because we were inside of land who just saw our mast disappear, who called it in. And they called it in, and a local surf lifesaver came out on his jet ski. Like, we were a fair way off the coast and he came out on his jet ski to help. And that was terrifying. It is terrifying to have your home break. Like, it was horrific. Again, as I said, no one was deeply injured, which was good. And it did end up being one of the best things that ever happened because we had to stop and fix the mast, which meant that we used all of our savings to fix the mast, and my dad had to get another job. And because he got that job, my brothers and I got to go to high school. Like, my brothers and I didn't think we were going to get to go to high school. It's only because the mast broke that we got to go to high school, that we got to then buy a house where that was. And we got to live consistently in the same place for several years. And Without the mask breaking, that wouldn't have happened. We would have continued traveling up into Indonesia. But that doesn't make it any less what the fuck that it happened. And it doesn't make the weather and the extreme weather events that we experienced and that our friends experienced any less terrifying. Cheap fruit and veggies. We're getting our first 10 out of 10 would do again. I don't know what the current prices for veggies and stuff are in Tonga and Fiji, but when we used to go to the local markets. This was like 2010 to 2013. And there would be just entire piles of mangoes for a couple of Fijian dollars. And sometimes there would be, like, we would trade, like we'd give blocks of chocolate and they'd give fruit or veggies, or sometimes villagers would just give us fruit or veggies, or we'd catch more fish than we did and we'd trade. But it was really, really nice to have like access to a lot of cheap and affordable fresh fruit and veggies that was homegrown. It was really, really good, and it was a variety that we'd not necessarily tried before. And it was fun. Like, I'm not necessarily a big fruit person, but I love veggies and I love mangoes, and that was really, really cool. And that was a really enjoyable part of it. The food was really, really enjoyable. Speaking of food, that one street food vendor in Tonga, I don't remember specifically what the food was. I know that it was some meat and veggies wrapped in leaves and then cooked underground. I can't remember what it was called, but I know exactly where the street vendor was. And it was the best food I've ever tasted in my entire life, and I stand by that. I can't describe it to you because this was like 15 years ago and I can't remember it super well. I just remember it being really, really good, and I still have cravings for it. And it was amazing. Like, as I mentioned, like just before, about the different cuisines and different foods and stuff, it was really, really good. And that was so, like, I'm not normally we're not normally like a foodie. Like, we don't like try a bunch of different cuisines and stuff all the time, but that slapped really hard. Okay, meeting people from all over the world. I'm not sure if I'm going to put this in enjoyable, I guess, or it is what it is, because this does tie into the social isolation and leaving people, but that really sucked. But because it's its own thing, I am going to put it in enjoyable, I guess, because it was really, really cool to meet so many different people. We obviously got to meet people from Tonga, people from Fiji, people from Samoa, but we also got to meet all the other people who were traveling on boats, which meant we met people from the Netherlands, people from Germany, people from America, people from the UK, people from Australia, people from other places in New Zealand. Like, we met so many different people, South Africans. There was so many different people that we got to meet. There was an old German couple in the marina where we lived for like solid chunks of time in New Zealand, who would brew their own spirits and stuff, and also buy a bunch of chocolate, and they'd invite us over for drinks. So our parents would get quite drunk, and us kids would do coloring in pages and get fed a bunch of chocolate. And that was really fun. They were really chill. They were like in their 70s at the time. They were just a really cool couple. There was a French girl in the first marina that we lived in New Zealand who we got along with really well, and she taught us a little bit of French that we don't really remember, but we used, like, she didn't know much English, and it didn't matter that we couldn't communicate. Like, again, we were in Tonga and Fiji, or even with like other boat kids who hadn't learned a lot of English. Just because we couldn't speak to each other didn't mean we couldn't play and couldn't get along, and it was really, really cool. There was also some American kids at that first marina that we got along with really well, and we used to build like forts and stuff with them, and they had a big boat. Their boat was bigger than ours, and so we'd go to their boat because it was bigger, and their trampolines on their boat, like, so the trams on a catamaran are like the parts that are between the hull and are mostly structural. Like, they're not designed to be jumped on, but theirs were designed to be jumped on and to be bouncy, so we'd go over and bounce on their trampolines, and it was really, really cool. And we got to do so many different opportunities. We got to help do like eye tests in Samoa. There was just so much stuff and so many people that we got to meet that was really, really influential as to who we are as a person. We got to go to, this is kind of only vaguely related, but so many different talks. There was one of the bars in one of the places in Tonga that we'd visit that would do like weekly different like presentations. So that's where we learned about sea shepherds. We learned a bunch of different, like, because people would just come and talk about their topics. We learned a lot about like environmental things and like specific things about manta rays or whales, and there was so much that we learned. This is vaguely related, but when we were in Victoria, even though we were doing like year 6 of primary school, there was a Jane Goodall speech at a city nearby, and so I pulled out of school to the day to go to that because that was more important to me than going to school, because I was going to learn more. And this could have also gone into creating your own curriculum, even though I was meant to be at school. I didn't wag school. Mum told school I wouldn't be there, and I just got to see a woman that I look up to and admire a whole lot talk about her passion for the world and for animals and for people and the environment. And it was just, it really, really shaped who we are. And it was really, really important to me. Another great thing, 10 out of 10 would do again, living right next to a playground. The marina that we were in New Zealand for a good chunk of time, the one I keep referring to, that marina was literally right next to a playground. Like you walk up the dock and the playground's right there. So myself, my brothers, the other boat kids, we would regularly go to this playground. Like we had a boundary area. We weren't allowed to pass a certain fence or pass a certain phone booth, but we could just kind of be there whenever. It would be pretty unsupervised. Like there would be like 13, 14-year-olds who'd be watching like the 8, 10-year-olds who'd be watching like the 3, 4-year-olds. Like the kids were kind of just running everywhere, like still within like time limits and, as I said, boundary constraints, but it was really cool to have such access to a playground. And then right next to the playground, like behind that fence, there was an art gallery and some like gardens and stuff. So sometimes we'd ask permission from like our parents to go there as well, just so that they'd know where to look for us if need be. And we'd play games like my friends and I used to play like elementals, or we used to play family at the playground. And it was just really, really cool. And it was a great experience for us as a kid to have just like an access to a place to play, because like a boat is quite small and quite cramped. Like our boat was 12 meters by 7 meters, which is quite small. So having space to run around and to go and play, even though admittedly we didn't go all that much. Our brothers went a lot more than us. We stayed at home and read our books, but it was still really fun to have access to that. Pet praying mantises. I'm going to put this in enjoyable, I guess, because we did have to leave them behind. But that same place as the playground, my brothers and I would find praying mantises in that garden at the art gallery, and we'd take them to the boat and we just looked after them. We gave them flies, we gave them food. They ended up mating, and the female did not eat the male. She had a reliable food source. She didn't eat him, but it did mean that she laid egg sacs, and we ended up with tiny praying mantises running around the boat for like a good several months after that. But then when we left New Zealand, we had to take all the praying mantises off the boat and back into the garden. But I remember one of our other friends there, I think they were from Belgium, they were going to the school temporarily, like the local primary school temporarily. And they also had pet praying mantises, like a bunch of the different kids' boats did. And so she went to school with her praying mantis on her glasses for the whole day. She was bullied for it, which was kind of unfair. But like, I still think that's really iconic of her to go to school with a praying mantis on her like glasses frame for the entire day. And that was really enjoyable. I realized that this wasn't randomized very well. I did try to randomize it, but we started with all the bad stuff first. Now we've only got like good stuff left. So I guess we're ending the video on a high note. Okay, swimming with whales. 10 out of 10 would do again. We were friends with a boat in Tonga. So in Tonga, you need a license to run whale swimming events, or charters, I should say. And we were friends with a boat who had their whale swimming license. And because we were friends with them, we didn't have to pay. They took us out a couple of times to go swimming with whales, and it was really, really cool. We had some very cool encounters with humpbacks. There were all humpbacks there. There was one of the swims, there was a whale that got very, very close to us. Not in a scary way, like it was underneath us and then it just came to the surface when we weren't expecting it. And it was only like probably 10 meters away from us, maybe less. And these are big creatures, so it feels really close as well. And it was a really, really cool experience. As I think you've probably picked up from us, we adore animals. Like animals are our favorite thing in the entire world. And getting these experiences swimming with whales, even just seeing them breach, seeing them do flukes, just seeing them swimming when we were traveling was really, really, really cool. Like we got to see so many different animals, especially marine life, and it was incredible. Swimming with manta rays, however, is only going in enjoyable, I guess. And this is because where we went swimming with manta rays, the manta rays were feeding, and manta rays eat small little jellyfish. So as cool as seeing the manta rays themselves were, that was really, really cool. We were getting stung. They weren't like highly dangerous, but they were still like itchy, stingy jellyfish stinging us. And that wasn't so fun. Like it was cool to see the manta rays, but the main thing I remember from that isn't the manta rays themselves, but getting stung by jellyfish. So I am just putting it in enjoyable, I guess. And then we have our final one, snorkeling. This is also going in enjoyable, I guess, because we're not a huge swimmer, but we got to see some really incredible snorkeling things. Like we got to see a bunch of different reefs in a bunch of different countries, a bunch of different fish. Like there was one time where my brother got bit by a clownfish because he went a little bit too close to their anemone. There was also an anemone in Tonga that we saw, like it was at one specific island, and we saw that anemone and the clownfish there in 2010, and then we returned in 2013, it was still there, and we got to see them again, and that was cool. Like we got to see a bunch of parrotfish, like eels. We saw a couple of very small reef sharks a couple of times, and we got out of the water pretty quickly, even though they were too small to do damage. You're a kid, sharks are scary. And it was really cool. Like it's not 10 out of 10 would do again, because as much as I enjoyed it, it's, I just, it's not as good as whale swimming, and it's not as good as living next to a playground, and it's not as good as the food. But it was really cool, and there was some really cool experiences that we got to have, and it was fun, and like, yeah. So that's our completed tier list. As you can see, there was a lot of really, really enjoyable things about traveling on a boat and growing up on a boat. And there were also some really, really hard and difficult things. And this tier list is also skipping over the abuse and trauma that we were experiencing at that time period. And that's just because we don't want to discuss the abuse and trauma publicly on YouTube. So that should also be a negative 10 out of 10 of what the fuck. So it's kind of semi-evenly balanced. But I still wouldn't do it again. If I got to choose, I would choose to grow up in a house. And I think part of that is because who I am as a person. I love a stable house. I love having consistent friends. I love having animals and pets. And that just wasn't really an opportunity for me. Like, I am grateful for the things I learned and the people that I've met and how many different life experiences I got to have that nobody else has got to have, or that very few people have got to have. But I wouldn't do it again. And I wouldn't do it to my kids. And I think that when you are traveling, if you choose to travel with your kids, there needs to be a sense of safety, stability, and consistency. So either you need a consistent return to point that those kids will know they will be able to return to, or you, the adults in that situation, need to be safe, stable, and consistent with those kids. Because if there is just chaos and uncertainty and confusion happening all the time, it's not going to be a great time for those kids. Like, there will still be great moments, there'll still be enjoyable moments, but it's actually a really hard life to travel a lot as a kid. But as I said, it can still be really fun, and I think a lot of it comes down to safety and stabilization and consistency that exist in the environment or with the people you're with. And we didn't have that, so we're biased. We are biased. But if you are choosing to travel with your kids, please make sure that they have some sense of consistency. Anyway, I hope that this was fun. Let me know if you enjoyed this style of video. We're thinking of making a tier list at the end of the year of all the different DID media that we review this year, so let us know if you're interested in that. I hope that you have all enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next week. Goodbye!